The late afternoon sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alex Carter's penthouse, painting the room in a warm golden glow. Toy blocks were scattered across the carpet, and a half-eaten apple rolled lazily off the coffee table. Ellie, his 3.5-year-old daughter, squealed from inside a pillow fort, her little giggles filling the room. Alex, CEO of Pierce Industries, but right now just Dad, crouched on the floor in rolled-up sleeves and slacks, fumbling with a tiny wooden duck puzzle. His phone buzzed. With a sigh, he answered. "Whatever it is, make it quick. I'm elbows deep in duck pieces." Ethan's voice crackled on the line. "Alex, I need a favor. Big one." "You always do," Alex muttered. I can't make it to dinner tonight. Blind date. Could you maybe go in my place?" Alex froze. "You want me to pretend to be you on a date?" "She's expecting someone, that's all. Just show up." Alex looked at Ellie. She was sticking a glittery sticker to his shoe with great concentration. He sighed. "Fine, but I'm bringing my daughter." "What? No, you can't." "Let's see how long she lasts when she realizes I brought a 3-year-old to dinner." He hung up. Ellie looked up with bright eyes. "Where are we going, Daddy?" He scooped her into his arms. "To meet a very pretty lady." "Is she nice?" "I doubt it," Alex muttered. "But I'm not going for me." Ellie giggled. "Can Bunny come?" "Of course. Bunny's essential to the mission." He dressed Ellie in a soft blue dress with yellow flowers, slipped on his blazer, and 15 minutes later they were headed downtown. Half a block from the restaurant, Alex slowed. Raised voices cut through the hum of the city. "I gave you a 20, a young woman was saying firmly. "The fare was 12. You owe me change." "You gave me a 10, the taxi driver snapped. She stood her ground. She had golden hair pulled into a messy braid, a thin beige coat, and a canvas tote so worn it looked older than she was. Her cheeks flushed with a mix of frustration and embarrassment. Alex parked, Ellie perched on his hip, and walked over. "Everything all right here?" The driver shrugged. "She's short." Without hesitating, Alex pulled a 20 from his wallet and handed it over. "That should cover it." The driver snatched the bill and sped off. The woman turned to Alex, her stormy eyes wide. "You didn't have to do that. I had it handled." "Sure looked like it," Alex said, adjusting Ellie on his hip. He started to walk away, but the woman stepped forward, holding out a crumpled dollar. "Take this." Alex blinked. "Why?" "I don't like owing strangers." He looked at her properly for the first time. She wasn't being polite, she meant it. Quiet, proud, different. He took the dollar. "Thanks." Ellie whispered into his ear as they walked away. She was pretty. "Don't get any ideas, kid," Alex muttered, but his mind was already elsewhere. At the restaurant, the maitre d' led them to a small corner table. Alex asked for a booster seat, but then stopped short. Sitting at the table, hands folded neatly in her lap, was the girl from the taxi. "You!" they both said at the same time. Ellie gasped. "It's the pretty girl, Daddy, it's her!" Hannah, because that was her name, smiled warmly at Ellie and crouched down. "And you must be Bunny's mom." Ellie giggled. "No, silly, Bunny's mine. I'm Ellie." "Well, Ellie, you have excellent taste in stuffed animals." Alex sat down with a sigh. "So, you're the blind date?" "Seems that way," Hannah replied easily. The restaurant was alive with soft laughter, the clinking of glasses and the warm hum of conversation. Golden light poured from the chandeliers above, bouncing across polished wood tables dressed in white linen. It was the kind of place where every detail, down to the faint music drifting from the piano, felt like part of a story waiting to unfold. The waiter stood quietly at the edge of the room, a tray balanced perfectly in his hand. He was invisible to most, just another uniformed shadow moving through the glow. But tonight, he noticed the eyes of the guests lingering, not because of his presence, no, because of the man at the center of the table. Li Wei, the billionaire, raised his glass high, surrounded by executives in suits that seemed more armor than clothing. His words cut the air like steel, sharp, cold, commanding laughter from those desperate to remain in his favor. The room bent around his arrogance, as if even silence itself had learned to obey him. And then it happened. A careless remark. A cruel sentence tossed like a stone into still water. His mocking words about the waiter weren't whispered. They were performed, delivered for effect, for entertainment, for the cheap applause of men who had forgotten how to respect another human being. The table roared with laughter. But then the waiter turned, calm, unflinching. He set the tray down with measured grace, his face bathed in that same golden light, and in perfect Mandarin, smooth, fluent, and sharp as glass, he answered. The laughter choked. Forks froze in midair. The air itself seemed to pause. The waiter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried weight not from volume, but from truth. In that moment, the room shifted. Power was no longer sitting at the billionaire's table. It stood, quiet and steady, in the form of a man in a simple uniform who had nothing to prove. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, Li Wei's smirk faltered. His glass trembled just enough for the light to catch it. The billionaire, untouchable in every boardroom, every deal, every lavish setting, was suddenly the smallest man in the room, and everyone knew it. The dinner, meant to be just another performance of wealth and status, became something else entirely. It became the night no one in that room would ever forget. The night the script flipped, the night silence spoke louder than applause. The dinner that changed everything. The silence after the waiter's words lingered longer than the laughter ever had. It pressed against the walls, thick and undeniable. A silence so heavy that even the soft piano in the background felt intrusive, like an uninvited guest. Li Wei sat frozen, his hand still hovering around the stem of his glass. His trademark smirk, the one that had conquered boardrooms and silenced rivals, was gone. What replaced it was something raw, something he had spent years burying beneath layers of arrogance, vulnerability. The executives who once laughed the loudest now looked down at their plates, suddenly fascinated by their untouched food. No one dared to meet his eyes. The performance was over, and in its place, shame had slipped into the spotlight. The waiter, calm as ever, simply lifted the tray once more and walked away. No flourish, no bow, no demand for applause. His steps were measured, almost reverent, as though he hadn't just tilted the balance of power in the room. But Li Wei felt it. He tried to steady his breathing, tried to summon the iron grip of control that had always been his weapon. Yet no matter how hard he searched, the mask wouldn't return. His mind replayed the words in Mandarin over and over, each syllable slicing through his pride like a blade. For the first time in years, the billionaire was left with no script, no retort, no way to win. He was stripped of his armor, and everyone had seen it happen. Outside, the city carried on. Cars hummed across wet streets, neon signs flickered, and life pulsed forward as if nothing inside that gilded restaurant had shifted. But for those seated at Li Wei's table, everything had changed. One executive coughed nervously, another shifted in his chair. The laughter that had once flowed so easily now clung to their throats, refusing to surface. They all felt it, the fracture, the ripple in the air. They had witnessed a moment that could not be undone. Li Wei's hand finally set the glass down, but the faint tremor betrayed him. The man who once seemed untouchable now looked smaller, diminished, haunted by the truth that had slipped so effortlessly from the lips of someone he had dismissed as nothing more than a servant. The room didn't return to normal. It couldn't, because power once cracked never shines the same way again. That night, as the waiter disappeared into the shadows of the kitchen, the billionaire sat in silence, staring at the reflection in his glass, and for the first time he wasn't sure he liked the man looking back at him. The fallout had begun.
The incident should have ended at that table. A slip of pride, a sting of humiliation, left to rot in silence among men too cautious to speak of it again. That's what Li Wei told himself as he left the dining hall that night, shoulders squared, steps heavy with a rehearsed defiance. But storms don't begin with thunder. They begin with whispers. It started small. A waiter in the kitchen, eyes still wide, retold what he had heard. Another server repeated it in the alley behind the restaurant, his voice carrying between cigarette drags. By the next morning, it was a story that belonged to more than the people who had witnessed it. The waiter spoke Mandarin, perfect Mandarin. He called him out, calm, fearless. You should have seen Li Wei's face. They say the room went silent, completely silent. By noon, the story had slipped through polished office doors and marble corridors, finding eager ears in every corner of the city's elite. Executives who once clung to Li Wei's shadow now repeated the tale in hushed tones, each adding their own embellishment. Some said the waiter had quoted a proverb. Others swore he had spoken with the wisdom of an elder. What mattered wasn't the details. It was the crack in Li Wei's armor, and the fact that everyone wanted to see it. On social media, it took root like wildfire. A single diner, too shaken to keep it to themselves, had let the words spill online. Within hours, hashtags bloomed like weeds. Hashtag, the waiter who spoke. Hashtag, Li Wei exposed. Memes followed. Cartoons of a monkey in a suit, silenced by a waiter. Quotes translated and reposted until they no longer belonged to the moment, but to the people. A cultural reckoning wrapped in mockery. And while the world laughed, Li Wei's empire began to tremble. Investors called, their voices tight with concern. A journalist requested comment. Business partners, once eager to display his friendship, now distanced themselves in polite but unmistakable ways. The weight of reputation, the currency he had built his empire on, was slipping through his fingers. Alone in his penthouse that evening, Li Wei scrolled through endless feeds of his own humiliation. Each post was another stone in the avalanche pressing against his chest. The glass windows offered a view of the glittering skyline, but even the city seemed to mock him, its lights blinking like eyes that had seen too much. The storm had begun, and there was no shelter strong enough to hold it back.
For men like Li Wei, power was never just wealth. It was presence, the ability to walk into a room and bend its air to your will. And now, for the first time, he felt that air slipping away. The whispers had grown too loud to ignore. Investors demanded answers. Former allies, men who once toasted to his dominance, now dodged his calls. And worst of all, his name no longer carried fear, but ridicule. The billionaire who had been undone by a waiter. By the third night, sleep abandoned him. His penthouse, once a sanctuary of glass and steel, felt like a gilded cage. He paced from room to room, barking at assistants on the phone, slamming doors, pouring drink after drink until the glasses clinked like war drums. "This ends now," he muttered to himself, over and over, as if the words alone could rebuild the empire crumbling beneath his feet. The first blow landed in the press. An anonymous article appeared, smearing the waiter as a fraud, an immigrant with no papers, a man with a criminal past. The language was sharp, surgical, designed to cut. Li Wei had ordered it himself, his money buying the kind of ink that stains reputations. But this time, it didn't work. Instead of burying the story, the smear backfired. People rallied to the waiter's defense. Old customers came forward, speaking of his kindness, his patience, the way he treated everyone with respect. Journalists dug deeper, uncovering not shame, but resilience. A man who had left everything behind to build an honest life from the ground up. The public sympathy only grew, and with it, Li Wei's rage. He lashed out at his staff, firing longtime employees for minor mistakes. Meetings ended with slammed fists and threats. His own board members began whispering about his instability, about the dangerous spiral of a man who had never learned how to lose. And still, the waiter remained silent. Not a word to the press, not a statement, not a defense. Just quiet, steady work at the same restaurant, serving tables with the same grace as before. His silence became louder than Li Wei's outbursts, a calm that made the billionaire's fury look like desperation. That contrast broke something in him. One night, drunk and trembling with fury, Li Wei smashed a crystal decanter against the marble wall of his penthouse. The shards scattered across the floor, glittering like the remnants of his once unbreakable image. He sank into the leather couch, chest heaving, eyes bloodshot with sleeplessness. He was losing. Not money, not deals, but something far more dangerous. He was losing control of the story. And for a man like Li Wei, that was worse than death. The city skyline stretched beyond the penthouse windows, sharp and glittering, but Li Wei saw nothing. His reflection in the glass was what haunted him, eyes ringed with shadows, jaw clenched, a face that looked like a stranger. For years, the mask had worked. The tailored suits, the cutting remarks, the arrogance, it was armor. People feared him, envied him, bowed to him. But now, when he stared into the glass, the mask slipped, and what stared back wasn't power. It was emptiness. The calls kept coming, but not the ones he wanted. Sponsors pulled out, shareholders demanded meetings he couldn't control. Even the tabloids mocked him with headlines dripping in venom, the billionaire who lost to a waiter. He tried to drown it out. Parties, liquor, even women paid to laugh at his jokes. But nothing stuck. The laughter sounded hollow. The applause felt staged. At night, when the noise faded, the silence was unbearable. It was in that silence that the memories returned. His childhood, dirty streets, a father's voice laced with disappointment, fists pounding against doors that never opened for him. He had sworn then that he would never be small again, never invisible. Wealth was supposed to be the cure, respect the reward. But now he saw the truth. He hadn't built respect, he had built fear, and fear was fragile. The crack widened when his assistant, his most loyal shadow, resigned without a word, just a letter left on the desk. "I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore." For the first time, Li Wei felt something he didn't know how to name. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pride, it was loss. One night, standing in the dark of his penthouse, he approached the mirror on the wall. He leaned close, searching for the man he thought he was. Instead, the reflection stared back hollow, broken, trembling. And for the first time in decades, Li Wei whispered the words he had never dared to admit, not even to himself. I don't know who I am without it. The mask had cracked, the empire was bleeding, and beneath the marble and gold, Li Wei discovered what he had feared all along. Without power, without control, he was just a man. A man no one loved, no one trusted, no one truly saw. The silence swallowed him, and for the first time in his life, he felt small again. The world did not wait for Li Wei. While he sat in his glass tower, watching his empire bleed, something else was happening beyond the marble halls of wealth. The story of that night, the insult, the slur, and the waiter's flawless Mandarin reply spread like wildfire. It started in whispers. A few stunned diners shared the moment with friends. Then the clip surfaced online. Grainy at first, filmed on a phone from across the dining hall. Li Wei's mocking words dripping with disdain. The silence of the crowd. And then the waiter's calm, dignified response that flipped the room on its head. The world saw it, and they didn't forget. In the streets of Shanghai, office workers replayed the video on their phones, shaking their heads at the arrogance of wealth. In cafes in Paris, students whispered about it between sips of coffee, marveling at the quiet strength of an ordinary man. In New York, late-night hosts replayed the clip, turning Li Wei into the punchline of jokes that drew thunderous laughter from live audiences. And the waiter, once invisible, became a symbol. His name spread, not just as the waiter who spoke back, but as a reminder that dignity, when wielded with calm and grace, can outshine power. Opportunities found him. Interviews, invitations, a seat at tables where he had once only served. And though he accepted some, he refused to let the sudden attention consume him. I was just doing my job, he would say. Respect is the least one human owes another. The humility only amplified the impact. He didn't chase fame. Fame chased him. Meanwhile, Li Wei found himself erased. Magazines that once worshipped him stopped returning his calls. Brands cut ties. Investors whispered about new blood. The tide of admiration that once flowed toward him had turned its back, and now surged toward someone he had tried to humiliate. For the first time, the billionaire wasn't the center of the story. He was the cautionary tale. And in quiet corners of the world, strangers who had never met the waiter felt something stir in their chests. A reminder that dignity was louder than cruelty. That arrogance could be toppled by a single act of grace. Li Wei had built an empire of fear. The waiter had sparked a movement of respect. The tide had turned, and nothing, not money, not power, not rage, could pull it back. Li Wei could not stand silence. For a man who once thrived on headlines, cameras, and the trembling respect of those who depended on his empire, obscurity felt like death. He paced his penthouse at night, city lights flickering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, each one a reminder of the world he no longer controlled. The clip still haunted him. No matter how many times he tried to bury it with expensive PR campaigns, new projects, or glossy interviews, the world had already chosen its story, and it wasn't him. He wasn't the billionaire visionary anymore. He was the man who mocked and was undone by a waiter. So he lashed out. At dawn, headlines screamed his desperate return, a lavish press conference staged like a coronation. Cameras filled the hall, but their lenses carried skepticism instead of awe. He strutted in with a smirk, determined to reclaim the narrative. "They call me cruel, arrogant," he declared, his voice booming across the microphones. "But what have I done except demand excellence? Do you think the world runs on kindness, on humility? No, it runs on power, and I am still power." The words echoed hollow. Some reporters shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked, knowing the man before them was digging his own grave. Clips of the speech hit the internet within minutes. His sneering face, his dismissal of dignity, his obsession with dominance. The world had no patience for it. Commentators tore him apart. His investors recoiled. One by one, the companies tied to his empire severed their contracts. By sundown, hashtags of mockery swarmed every platform. Hashtag empty crown. Hashtag powerless power. But it wasn't just the public. Behind closed doors, those who once bent to him no longer feared him. The boardroom whispered louder. Lawyers arrived with folders, and in a single brutal motion, his own empire voted him out. Leeway, the untouchable, had been touched and toppled. He returned to his penthouse that night to a silence so heavy it seemed to press on his chest. No calls, no invitations, no friends. Only the distant glow of a city that had already moved on. In his desperation to be feared again, he had revealed himself completely and lost what little was left. The collapse wasn't explosive, it was quiet. Dignity had ended him without raising its voice. The city didn't pause for Leeway's fall. It flowed past him, like water rushing around a stone that had lost its shape. But the story didn't fade. Clips of the waiter's calm reply, spoken in perfect Mandarin, had been replayed millions of times. In classrooms, in boardrooms, in quiet homes late at night, people watched and whispered, not about Leeway's cruelty anymore, but about the dignity of the man who had stood in silence until the moment demanded his voice. News outlets traced his story, a son of immigrants working 2 jobs to help his younger sister through college. A man invisible in the grand dining halls of the rich, until the world's gaze turned and found him standing straighter than the billionaire who mocked him. He never courted the cameras. He never gave fiery speeches. When reporters found him bussing tables at a small cafe weeks later, he only smiled shyly. "I'm not a hero," he said softly. "I just spoke up." But the world had already decided. Universities invited him to speak about resilience. Companies reached out, calling him a symbol of true leadership, the kind that wasn't shouted, but lived. A charity in his name was founded, focused on education for children like him, who were overlooked until the moment they shone. And in the quiet corners of society, where people felt unseen, his story became something more than news. It became a mirror, a reminder that dignity, even whispered, outlasts arrogance shouted from the rooftops. Leeway, once a giant, had crumbled, but the waiter, nameless no longer, was etched into the collective memory. His courage, his composure, his quiet refusal to break under humiliation. It became the thread people carried forward, not because he sought it, but because the world needed it. In the end, empires fell, but dignity remained, and one act of quiet courage outlasted everything.
Years passed. The glittering towers of the city changed their shape. Fortunes rose and fell, and new names replaced the old on billboards and boardroom doors. But one story, quiet, almost fragile at first, never faded. Children learned it in schools, not as a tale of wealth or grandeur, but of a simple truth. Dignity has a power money cannot buy. Teachers played the clip of the waiter, standing tall in his uniform, his calm voice cutting through cruelty. Students watched, wide-eyed, as the man once mocked as invisible became the embodiment of strength. In small cafes and busy libraries, his words were repeated by those who felt unseen. "I just spoke up." They were whispered as comfort, carried as courage, recited as prayer. The charity he never sought grew into a movement. Thousands of children, once overlooked like he had been, walked into classrooms wearing confidence as their first language. Not all of them knew his name, but they lived in the light his moment had sparked. As for Leeway, his empire became a cautionary footnote, a man who mistook fear for respect, whose legacy crumbled because it had been built only on power. And the waiter, he never became a celebrity. He lived quietly, loved deeply, gave generously. On the day he passed, his funeral was small, but the world outside carried his story forward. Generations later, when people spoke of dignity, they didn't summon the names of kings or billionaires. They spoke of a waiter in a dining hall, who refused to be broken, who answered cruelty with composure, who showed that greatness sometimes wears the simplest clothes. No marble statue marked his legacy, no monument bore his face, but in the silence of countless hearts, in the courage of those who stood tall when mocked or dismissed, his story lived on. Because legacies are not written in gold. They are written in silence, in the moments that echo louder than power itself. And his will never fade.